the shops just behind me here. Now this word Bryggen, people often ask me, they say, is that an old name for Bergen or another way of saying Bergen? It's not. The word Bryggen simply means the wharf, so it's a very simple name for this area here. The buildings that are behind me are the oldest part of this wharf, built just after the city fire of 1702, but the wharf is actually divided into three sections. We have the old section just here, and then we have the modern section of wooden buildings just at the end, with which your hotel is also a part of, and then over this side we have the brick-built buildings of the wharf. Now, if you'd have turned up here in Bergen at the turn of, say, the 1800s, for example, the wooden buildings would have extended all the way along the length of the wharf here. The reason they don't anymore is not because of a fire. It's actually because the city government at the turn of the 1900s decided that the wooden buildings, like the ones behind me, were too small and impractical for use in a modern city. So they wanted to start to tear them down and replace them with these large brick-built buildings here. The plan had been to destroy the whole wharf. As you can see, they didn't. They were distracted. We had a fire in 1916 in the modern city centre as we know it today. This meant the city government had to focus on rebuilding the city centre, not destroying the oldest parts of it. By the time they had done that, they thought perhaps it was a good idea if they preserved some of the oldest buildings. The reason that we have modern wooden buildings at the other end of the wharf where your hotel is because unfortunately in the 1950s there was a fire here that destroyed the oldest buildings that stood there. This of course was a terrible loss, but it also turned out to be a really positive event. Partly the age of buildings built after the fire of 1702, also because of the style of the buildings. 100 years old, the style of them actually dates back much longer. If you came to Bergen in the 1100s or the 1200s, this area of the city would have looked exactly the same. The reason for this is that each time there was a fire, they rebuilt these buildings in exactly the same way. This sounds maybe a little bit silly to you or I, but at that time this was not only the commercial centre of Bergen, it was the commercial centre of Norway, and who dominated trade for many centuries, and they dominated trade here in Bergen for 400 years. This was their longest running office, running from 1360 to 1754. Now we're going to start walking around this area here, about what attracted these German Hanseatic merchants. One product that attracted them here, a product known as stockfish. This is a kind of dried salted cod. If you go to the fish market, you'll still see it for sale there today. This dried salted cod comes from the coast of Norway and typically from northern Norway, Bergen, and this is where it would have been exported from. This was thanks to a decree from the king saying that all imports and exports to Norway had to come through the city of Bergen. The stockfish was the main export, followed by cod liver oil, which also came from the cod of the north of Norway, and the main import here was grains and cereals. Very important, you've probably noticed they don't grow much in the way of grains and cereals here today. That's always been the case. In fact, back in history, Bergen was known as the bread capital of Norway. So the Hanseatic merchants, they heard about this going on. They heard about almost essentially this trade monopoly in Bergen of everything coming in and out of Norway, and they 10 properties in it. Each property was used as a business firm, it was used as a warehouse, it was used as a bedroom, and as a place for people to gather as well. So these properties really were multifunctional. You thought of them as business firms, as houses, and as warehouses as well. So they had everything all in one. Each tenement had a number of shared properties. For instance, down at the wharf, they would share a hoist, a boom, and a kind of a shed area to temporarily store goods. And that would be shared then by all of the business firms that were in one tenement. When we go to the back in just a moment, you're going to see other shared properties that are examples of, for instance, cookhouses and communal assembly rooms. So if you here at the back of the wharf, first of all, I want to talk about this stone building, which is directly behind me. This building here was referred to as a stone cellar. Now I know it's not a cellar and it is all above ground, but it was used for storage. They used to keep their most valuable items inside this stone cellar and many others like it to protect them from fire. They couldn't build the whole area out of stone, it would take too long and be expensive as I said, but they did have a few stone buildings and these were used to protect the more valuable of their goods. If you look right, this used to be a communal assembly room. A communal assembly room was a shared property. It would have been shared by one or maybe two tenements here at the back. And when you went into the communal room, what you would see is a room filled with tables, and each business firm would have its own designated area in which it would sit. These were also shared properties. When you went into a cookhouse, you would typically see that around the edge there were a number of workstations, and each workstation would belong to a respective business firm and have its respective pots, pans and utensils. Is that the king cod has a much bigger head, and it's because of this they got their name, and also that they were thought to bring good fortune. So instead of having their heads chopped off to be hung over a rack to be dried and salted, they would be gutted, then they would be completely dried and salted. You can see there's a large rope hanging, and at the end you can see a hook at the end. This is a very simple hoister or winch system. The rope is wound around a large wheel in the loft, and the other half of the rope hangs on the inside of the building. So you could stand there and you could winch your hoistings up to whichever level you wanted to bring them in. A very practical way of moving goods around. Some of these have been maintained and can still be used today. There's one at the end of this tenement on the right hand side, you can check if you don't believe me, that can take up to 500 kilograms in weight. So they can be extremely strong. Of course it's with modern material.